what I was thinking for the best way to cover basic HTML and CSS would be to build an actual website up. So today we're going to be building out this simple, but I feel like it should be able to teach you guys basic HTML and CSS that we want to learn today. So I'm going to be using Replit. I don't know if you guys heard of that. And you guys can feel free to follow along, but for this workshop, I would just recommend to watch. And I do understand that it's going to be kind of confusing. Like some of the tags you won't remember, you won't know what they are, and I'll do my best to explain them. And the CSS, you may or you may not know what CSS properties I'm going to be using, but just hang in there, and I promise you, by the end of the workshop, I'll explain everything. Okay, so let's begin. So everyone knows that you start off HTML with some boilerplate. That sort of looks like this. And so whatever is in the head tag, all this stuff is not that important for today. We're going to be more focusing on the body tag. But one thing that we should do is we should link our style sheet. And I don't know how much experience you guys have with CSS and HTML together, but if that's totally fine if you have none. What I'm doing right here is I'm just linking up my style sheet for CSS. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be writing the CSS in this file and then writing the HTML in here. So there you go. I've linked the style sheet. I think we can start beginning the HTML framework. So the first thing that we're going to be needing to do is just build out the landing. This is a landing section, and so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and then in this section, let's start with the nav tag. So this is something called a nav bar. I'm pretty sure most of you guys know what that is. And in HTML, there is a dedicated tag for that called nav. And in the nav tag, we're going to first have, of course, the logo, then the menu icons, or the menu links, and then this button right here. So yeah, let's make the logo. Correct, yeah. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to wrap any of my image tags in a figure tag, and that just allows me to resize it more efficiently. So if you guys don't know what classes are just pretty much a way to reference a HTML element in CSS. So the way I can do that, I'll show you guys in just a second. The logo I'm going to be using is just something I found online, and I've saved it to right here, logo.png. So let's do that. And then as you guys can see, this looks extremely massive. So the way we're going to be able to resize that is head over to CSS, and we can reference a class by a period and then the class name. And let's set this width to 100 pixels. That's how that looks. That's still way too big. Oh, 1 second, guys. There you go. Okay, so what I did, I referenced this class, this image class, and I set the width. I'll show you guys what we can do with the figure class in just a second. So as you can see, this kind of resized to right about the size that we want it to be. And let's add h1 tag. And we can call this GDSC. And we can give this a class name of logo header. Alright, so as you guys can see here, this one element takes up the entire line right here, and which forces this element to go into its own line. And what's this called? This is called inline and block elements in HTML. So a block element, like a image, takes up the entire horizontal space and forces all the other elements to the new line. And so the one way we can fix this is by using a CSS property called display flex. And so let me move this over here, and we're going to reference this class right here in the CSS. And if we write display flex, as you can see, this GDSC, which was on its own line, moved up to the same line that the image logo was on. And so this property, you guys, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but we're going to be using it a lot. And so I'll do my best to explain what it does. Okay, now we can start building out these menu links. So we're going to first use a div. Div is just pretty much a way to structure things. It doesn't have its like own element use per se, but it's very, very good when you want to structure things that are like going to go in the same place, pretty much. So let's make these are link tags. Pretty much what they do is, here, I'll show you guys. So it allows me to connect a link with text. And so I don't have anything up for this, but if you did have a home page, which is this, and if you did have an about page, you could link to the about page. So for now, I'm just going to set this to no link, and this is the home page. And then let's make the about page and the contact. Perfect. So as you can see again, these new elements went to a brand new line because the nav bar is not in flex, meaning it won't make the child elements, as you can see here, this figure tag and this div tag, which are the child elements of this nav tag, it won't make them in line. It'll keep them block, which once again, it means when the elements are in their own brand new line. But we'll go ahead and fix that in just a second, right after we add this button right here. So the way we can do that is the button tag, and let's give this a class of nav button and learn more. Perfect. Okay, so this default buttons in HTML kind of look ugly, as you can see. So we're gonna fix that. I think our HTML for now is done. Let's go work on CSS. And so the first thing that we're gonna do in CSS is reference the nav, and when you're referring elements, this is an element, this is an element, this is an element, you don't have to put a period in CSS. When you're referencing classes, that's when you have to put a period. And then ID, we'll get into that later, but when you reference an ID, use a hashtag. But you guys don't need to know that for now. Okay, so we have the nav. I think one thing would be really helpful is to put a border on this so you guys can see where it is on the screen. So as you can see, it's over here. Okay, and I don't know if you can notice, but there is a space between this line and where the actual page starts. And so CSS, by default, it gives a default margin and padding. And if you guys don't know what that is, we'll get into that later. But for now, let's just set that to 0. And there you go. It moved up, and now it's in line with the page. And one thing we can go ahead and do is just do box sizing and border box. And what this pretty much allows us to do is the element size will be determined after factoring in the padding and the margin. And no worries, I'll explain what this is in just a second. So as we can see, we have the nav bar right here. And what we want the nav to do is we want these elements to be here and this element to be there. And the best way we can do that is, as you guys know, display flex. And there you go. Now these are all in line in one line. And if we want to space it out horizontally, you can use something called justify content. And if I wanted to space it out in the center, this would make all the elements in the nav tag come to the center. And one thing to keep in mind is you can only use justify content center when you use display flex. But center doesn't really look good, so there's also something called space between, which means it will space out these elements with equal space in between them. So for example, there's equal space here and there's equal space here. This looks a little bit better, but still doesn't look as good as we want it to be. So let's do the other one, which is space around. And this kind of looks more like a nav bar that we're going for. The next thing that we can do, as you guys can see, these elements are all on the top, and we kind of want them in the center. So once again, if you use display flex, you can also use this property called align content, and we can say we can align that center. Oops. My bad. It's align items. There you go. And as you can see, these elements from here came from all the way to the top to the center. Now let's kind of work on what we have going on over here. So if you saw over here, this is the figure. These two are wrapped under the figure, so we're going to reference that so you guys can see what that is. And we're going to put a border around that. And so one thing that I would like to do is move this in line with the logo, so kind of in the center of this logo wrapper. So the way you can do that is, once again, we have a displayed flex. Let's align items center. And what this will do, as you guys probably figured out, is center this. Okay? And I think this is looking a lot better. But one thing that I would like to do is kind of give more space for these menu items. Let's go back over here. Let's get this class. And let's reference it in CSS. And so the way that I think I'm going to give this space is, let's set the width to about 40%. And so what this does is, let's put a border on it so you can see. So what this will do is it will set this div to a width of 40% of its parent. And the parent in this case is the nav tag. The nav tag technically has a width of 100% to span the entire page. So now this has a width of 40%. And currently it kind of looks whack because it's all to the side. But the way we can fix that is, again, display flex and justify content. And let's do, once again, space around. And remember, space around pretty much makes it so there is equal space around these items. So there's going to be equal space here, equal space here, equal space here, and so on. And now this is looking a lot better, but I feel like it could look a little bit better. So let's import a font. And the best way to import a font, in my opinion, is just going to Google Fonts, click on a font that you like. In this case, we're going to be using Roboto. And let's select this, select this, select this, and select this. And then, if you want to bring that over and import it into your style sheet, it's very, very simple. You go to over here, and you just copy and paste this on top of your CSS. And once again, it's completely fine if you don't understand this yet. Once we keep on doing it, it'll make more and more sense to you. And then when you want to call the font, this tag pretty much references all the elements in the HTML DOM. So the way we can do that is we can do font family. And if I'm not mistaken, they have it right here. Perfect. Copy and paste that. And all the text should be replaced with the Roboto font. And it's looking slightly better. But let's reference the nav link, which, if you remember, were these ones right here. And what we can do after we reference them is, let's set the color to black. Let's do text decoration none. And pretty much what text decoration allows you to do is, it allows you to remove the underline. Okay, you can add an underline too if you want, but in this case we're going to be removing it. And let's set the font size to 22 pixels. I think that should be nice. Perfect. Okay. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this one right here. It's kind of small in proportion with the logo. So what we can do is we can reference the logo header. And let's set this to a font size of 24 and a font weight. So if you guys don't know what font weight is, it's pretty much the weight or the boldness of a certain font. So as you can see, we have 4 weights here. We have 100, 300, 400, and 700. 700 being the most thick. So once I save that, you can see that this got a little bit bigger since we increased the font size, and a little bit darker since we... Actually, no, it didn't get a little darker since I spelled weight wrong. There you go. Perfect. And let's add a little bit of margin. Okay, now let me explain to you what's the difference between margin and padding. So let's add a border around this. And so as you can see, it's highlighted the element that we're trying to add properties to. And so when we add a margin, let's add a margin to the left side of 12 pixels. As you can see, the space between this element and this element increased right here. Okay, but if we were to add padding, 12 pixels, the space between the element's border and the element itself would increase. So that's what padding is. It increases the space inside the border. And as you'll see, that'll be really useful for a button. But for our logo header, we can just stick to margin, which increases the space outside the border. Okay. Now that we've got that, let's work on making this button look a little bit better. And the way we can do that is, once again, reference stand our CSS. Oops. And so the first thing that I like to do in a border is just add some padding to it. And let me do that real quick, 24 pixels. So when I have 2 digits right here, the first one represents the padding on top and the bottom, and the second digit represents padding from left to right. So as you can see here, we want the padding to be 14 pixels from the element to its border. And in this case, we have 14 pixels on the top and bottom. The second one represents the padding between the left and the right. So the left border and to the beginning of this L in Learn More will be 24 pixels, and likewise from E to this border, it will also be 24 pixels. And one thing we can do is we can set the border to none, since I think borders don't look good on buttons, and that's already starting to look a lot better. Let's set the background color. And one thing to keep in mind is it's not necessary to remember all these properties in CSS and how to phrase them. Even if you search them up on Google, and as long as you know what you want to do, you should be able to find it. So I have this specific color in mind that I'm just going to copy and paste. And there you go. We changed the background color. Now let's change the font color to white. And I think we should increase the font size as well to about 18 pixels. See how that looks. That looks good enough. And one thing I'm going to do is, this is not 100% not required, but it looks a lot better in my opinion, is add a border radius. And what border radius does is, as you're about to see, is it rounds these corners down. So if I increase this to, let's say, 20 pixels, as you can see, it became more and more round. You can also use percentages for these, but I would stick to pixels since they're the easiest. And let's set that to 8 pixels for now. Let's see how that looks. Let's remove these borders so we can get a better look. Perfect. It's looking a lot better. One thing I want to try, however, is just set the font weight for these to about 300. And that pretty much just makes it lighter. If you guys remember, we imported a 300 font weight, and that was this one right here. So I think our nav bar is looking good for now. We'll come back and make some finishing touches, but I think we can move on to the next section, which, if you guys see over here, is the header section. But one thing before I do that is I'm going to set a defined height for the nav tag. And let's set that to 125 pixels. Okay, this should be good for now. And if you guys want to see what I did real quick, let's just increase this height right here. So before it was slightly smaller. Okay, we increased that to 125 pixels. Perfect. Let me comment this out. And let's move on to the other section on this landing. And that is the header. What's up? So default, it will just take on the biggest element. So in this case, it was the logo, right? And then that part would just fit to that height. But we set a custom height, which we're going to be using in the header in just a second here. So HTML has its own tag for when you want to call it a header. And let's go ahead and fill this header in with some of the stuff that we're going to need. So for example, if you guys see over here, we have an H1 saying Google Developer Student Clubs, and then a paragraph tag, listing out what this is, and then also a button and a image. We're going to forget the image for now. We're going to get back to that in just a second, but let's start building this out. And the way we can do that is by using a div, and let's set this to class header content. Okay. And once again, if you guys are confused right now, that's totally fine. I know some of you guys, this is your first time seeing HTML and CSS and actually building a website, and it can be a little overwhelming. But if it is, just keep in mind that this is your first time learning, and as you come to more and more with these workshops, you're going to become better and better. And so hopefully by the end of these workshop series, we'll be able to build a e-portfolio for you, so you can show, like, if you want to apply for a job in web development, you can show that you've done this. But for now, let's start with something simple, a simple website, so you guys can get a hang of it. Let's add an H1 class, an H1 tag with the class of header title, and let's set that to Google Developer Student Clubs. So as you can see, it aligned itself here, and one thing to make this easier is let's reference the header, and I'm going to move it down under the nav, and let's add a border, 1 pixel solid red. Okay, this is just defining the width of the border, this is defining the style of the border, and this is defining the color of the border. And the order of this does not matter. And as you can see, it's kind of thin right now. And Kenta, the question that you're asking before, like, how do you determine the height and the width? The width is usually the entire width of the page, and the height is just the height of the largest element inside that element. So in that case, we don't want the header to be this small. We kind of want it to stretch all the way down to the end of the page. And something that you can do to do that is you can use a height property, and let's set the height to 100 vertical height. And so vertical height is just a unit that is relative to your own screen size. And so instead of having like 100 pixels, you can choose 100 vertical height, which is the 100% of the vertical height that you see right now. And that in our case, that will be all the way from here to all the way here. And if you see, that's kind of a little bit too big because we have this element also in the page, the math bar, which has its own height. And so, as you can see, in order to conform with the 100 vertical height property that we gave it, it adds a little bit more that we have to scroll down to. And we kind of don't want that. So what we can do, it's very, very easy. We can add something called a calc 100 vertical height minus 125 pixels. And the way I got the 125 pixels is from here, this height. So what this is doing is this is setting the height of the header to the entire width of the page, entire height of the page minus 125 pixels. And this concept is slightly advanced, so it's totally fine if you guys don't understand it yet. But it will be important for our website. And just a second. So as you guys saw here, it didn't actually set the height to what I wanted to do. Oh, there you go. I think it was just glitching in Replit. Perfect. Okay, so now the height is all the way from here to the bottom of the page. And that's exactly where we want it to be. So now we can move back to this, and let's add our p tag. And when you add a p dot something, you can add the class over here. So in our case, it'll be para. And then when you, when you click tab, it should automatically set this as class for you. And it's just some way to do it quicker instead of manually typing it out. But obviously, manually typing it out is a lot easier. So you can do that as well. But for now, let's copy and paste our para tag. And there you go. It shows up right here. And I think one last thing that we'll need for this is just the button. And there you go. Let's set that to class of header button. And also, when you're naming classes, you can do whatever you want. I just choose to tend to make it like the simplest, which is header content, header title, header button. But this could be called whatever you want, as long as you keep it consistent. And then let's do join a club. Perfect. Okay. So we've got this, but it's not looking that great yet. And let's fix that. First we're going to do is we're going to reference the header content. Then what we're going to do is we're going to reference over here the header title. And then I think that should be good enough for now. So first what we're going to do for header content, and as you can see, they are all in its vertical, all in their own lines, which is kind of what we want, right? But we're still going to use display flex, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So as you guys would expect, if you use display flex without any additional properties, it'll make all these elements in the same exact line. Okay, and that's what it did right here. But if we do flex direction column, that will set the direction to the column. And before, the default value without having any properties is row. And that's what we had before. But when you set it to column, it makes all these elements pretty much in a column. And that's kind of what we want. Let's set a border so we can see what we're working with. There you go. Okay. Now, one thing that I like to use is percentages when I define height. And so percentages, if you guys don't know, pretty much take on it uses the initial property of the parent element, and in this case, the parent tag is this div tag right here, and then the child elements are this h1, this p tag, and this button class. And if this doesn't make totally sense to you guys right now, that's also totally fine. It took me a while to learn what headers and parents were, but we're going to be using this concept, and we're going to set the height of 50% of its parent. And you'll see that in just a second. The border that we set now shows that this is 50% of the header content. Or I mean, sorry, the header. And so that's kind of what we want. And next thing that we can do is, this is going to be slightly confusing, but if you guys remember, when we did display flex, we used justify content space around to space these around horizontally, right? But when you use flex direction column, you have to use something called justify content, same thing, but this time, this doesn't space things out horizontally, rather space these things vertically. So if we do justify content space around, as you'll see, now they're separated vertically. And that's kind of what we need. Let's also do one last thing. Let's do text align center, and this pretty much aligns all the text into the center. That's kind of like, you know, when you're working with Word and there's like all these options to right justify, center justify, left justify. That's pretty much what this does. And one thing that I feel like we could do is we could also set the width to be 60% of its parent. And there you go. As you can see, this is now 60% of its parent. But there's an issue. This 60% is now all the way to the starting on very, very start. And we kind of want this in the center. And there will be two ways to go about doing this. First is display flex and justify content center on this parent. But I want to show you guys a neat little trick that you can use. So when you want to center the element to this parent, you can use margin 0. Okay, remember, the first value always defines the top and the bottom. So we want 0 margin on the top and the bottom of this element. But we're going to let CSS figure out auto. And as you'll see in just a second, this will center it for us, automatically center this element for us. And if I set this to something like 10 pixels, there'll be 10 pixels of margin on each side. But auto is the easiest way to do this. We don't have to, play around with these settings, and this will automatically center this for us. Okay, I think this header content is looking good for now. Let's work on the header title, which is this element right here. And we can set the font size to 54 pixels. Okay. And I think that's all we need to do for that. Let's reference the header era and set this to a font size of 24 pixels. Alright. And then let's reference this button. So let's take this and let's add some styling to this. So as you guys know, we first start off with padding. Let's do 20 pixels by 32 pixels. And as you can see, that added space inside the border of the element. Okay, and speaking of border, let's set the border to none since we don't want a border in our buttons. Let's set the background color to the same color that we used over here. And let's set the color of the text to white. Perfect. Okay, one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the font size slightly to 18 pixels. And that's just going to increase the font size of the text inside the button. And one last thing that we can do, if you guys remember, would be the border radius. And that's just to kind of curve these edges. So let's set the border radius to, once again, 8 pixels. There you go. So one thing you can see here is we don't want this to span the entire width of the header content. So preferably the best thing to do would be set the width to 50% of its parent. So parent's width is all this over here. It will pretty much be 50% of that. So it'll be from here to here. And if we do that, as you can see, that's what it did. And remember what I said about margin? We can just use margin to automatically center that for us. There you go. Perfect. I think it's looking pretty good so far. Let's remove this border since we don't need that anymore. And we have something that looks like this. And the next thing that we need to work on, and this is going to be the final thing, is our image tag. And so let's set that figure. Figure is just a way to wrap images that I prefer. You don't have to use it. I just prefer using it. Let's set that class to header image wrapper. And over here, let's set the image tag And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the image tag, as well as all these other tags over here. I feel like the only elements that you guys may not be familiar with is this header, figure elements, and perhaps divs. But I hope that you guys understood what they do. And figures, like I said, we don't need to use them right now. They're kind of more advanced topics, but it's a habit that I have, and I'll explain that in a further workshop, what they exactly do. So let's set the src, the source for this image. And so I got this image from a website called Undraw, and it pretty much allows you to get a bunch of graphics based on the color pattern of your choice. And so I've already selected this right here, and I can access that by just using this. And as you can see, the image now appears. And one thing you'll notice is that this is way too big for what we need. And the way to fix that is referencing the figure. Okay, and then we'll set the height or the width to 400 pixels. And what we're going to be doing, so as you can see, this will not make a change. In order for this to make a change, we have to set all images to be a width of 100% of their parent. And this is also a pretty advanced topic, okay? You don't have to understand it completely just yet. I'll explain it more in further workshops. Okay, so as you can see, now we've got this menu and this. And if you want to center this, the easiest way to center this would be to, like I said, margin. Let's put a 24 pixel margin, and let's do auto. Once again, I'll go over this just in a second. Margin will set the top and the bottom, okay? The margin on the top and the bottom of the element, and the auto will automatically align in the center. Okay. So from what I can see, we are practically done. Almost. Let me just make some last finishing touches. Set this to 50 pixels. 50% I meant, not bad. 50% of its parent. And let's remove this border right here. So as you can see, this is really similar to what we have over here. But one thing you'll notice is when I bring this out over here, everything stretches to the very end. Okay, and as we'll see here, that's not happening over here. And the best way to fix this is a more advanced topic, but also cover it just so you guys can get a quick glance. But this is not covered in today's workshop, so if you don't understand it, that's totally fine. Okay, so we're going to go over to our nav tag, and we're going to set the width to 100%. Okay, the width is already 100%, so that won't make a change. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the max width to about 1250 pixels, meaning as the browser gets bigger and bigger, okay, this nav element will only stay at a max of 1250 pixels. And as you can see here, it starts off pretty small, okay, goes big. Now it hits 1250 pixels over there and it stops getting bigger. And so if you want to center this with the rest of the page, as we know, we can use margin 0 auto. And there you go, that centers it. I feel like this is looking good, the nav bar is looking good. Let's make some fixes to the header content. And let's go down to header content, and let's set the width to 60%, which we already did, and the max width to 625 pixels. And that's pretty much half of what we set this to, the nav bar's max width. And as you can see, that will pretty much just make it so it looks better and it doesn't stretch out more than we need it to. So as you can see, this looks pretty much like this, like what we wanted to do. One thing you'll notice, however, is if I make it really small, the format doesn't really look too good. And that's called responsiveness, and we'll cover that in our next workshop because I don't want to make this workshop too long. And it's also a slightly advanced topic. But I feel like we finished the website, and one thing I'll do is also I'll send the this replit, so you guys, if you guys want to, you guys can take a look at what I did, and if there's any other concepts that you don't understand, you can play around with them. But for now, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask them right now. But if not, I think we can wrap up this workshop. Let me go ahead and share this over here. Kenta, where do you want me to put the link for the? I believe I do. Perfect. Okay. So that's just the website that we built here today. It's pretty simple. It was pretty basic, but I hope it gives you guys a little bit of an understanding how HTML works with CSS. In our next workshop, we're going to be covering up a little bit more advanced topics. And then in the workshop after that, we're going to be looking at React. So if there are no other further questions, I think we can conclude the workshop. Thank you guys for coming, and have a great day. All right, yeah, you guys are free to go. We'll send an announcement on when the next workshop's going to come, so just stay tuned for that. But yeah, Kenta, if you have anything else to say, otherwise I think we can wrap this up.